In a quiet European town where the rain never truly leaves and memories linger like shadows, a woman named Clara learns that some loves never disappear. They simply change shape. This is not a story about loss, but about what remains after everything falls apart, about the silence that follows goodbye, and the fragile beauty of finding yourself again. You're listening to The Echo of Yesterday, a story of love, loneliness, and the quiet rebirth of the human heart. The mornings in this small European town had a kind of stillness that felt both comforting and cruel. The streets were cobbled and damp from the night mist, the air heavy with the smell of coffee and faint traces of rain that never really left. Clara would walk through the narrow lane every day, past the same bakery, the same bookstore that had a cat sleeping on the windowsill, the same faded posters on the walls. Everything looked as if it had been paused long ago, waiting for something that never came. She had been living here for almost a year now, in a small apartment above an old florist's shop. The scent of lilies and roses drifted up through her open window every morning, soft and persistent, mixing with the scent of her black coffee. Sometimes she thought the flowers were the only things still alive around her. The rest, the walls, the photographs, even her reflection, felt frozen, like a fragment of time she could not escape. There were days when Clara would sit by the window, watching the people move below, the old man feeding pigeons, the young couple arguing near the bus stop, the mother holding her child's hand. They all had somewhere to go. She didn't. She just watched, like a ghost of her own story. The world kept turning, yet her heart had stopped somewhere in the past, in another city, beside another heartbeat. She had once believed in forever. That belief had a name, Lukas. The sound of his laughter still echoed faintly in her mind, the way a melody lingers after the music has stopped. She tried to forget, to silence it with work, books, endless cups of coffee, but some memories refused to die. They lived in small details, in the way the light fell across her desk, in the pattern of rain sliding down the glass, in the way autumn smelled like the first day they met. In this town, time didn't heal her. It only taught her how to hide the wound better. She often walked to the river in the evenings. The bridge there had a rusted railing and an old lamp that flickered with every gust of wind. It was her quiet sanctuary. She would lean against the cold iron, close her eyes, and let the sound of water wash over her thoughts. Sometimes she imagined Lukas standing there beside her, not speaking, just existing. That silent kind of closeness they once shared, the kind that words could ruin. People said that the rain here had a memory, that when it fell, it carried whispers from the past, voices, regrets, unfinished stories. Clara used to smile at the superstition. Now, she wasn't so sure, because every time it rained, her heart seemed to remember what her mind tried to forget. There were letters she never sent, words she never said. They filled her drawers and notebooks, scattered like unsent confessions. In one of them, she had written, "I don't hate you for leaving. I hate that I still wait for the sound of your footsteps." She didn't know why she kept writing. Maybe it was her way of speaking to the silence, her way of keeping herself from disappearing completely. Sometimes she would burn the letters one by one, watching the paper curl into ash. The smoke would rise and fade, and for a moment she'd imagine her pain dissolving with it. But when the ashes cooled, everything inside her felt exactly the same. that was the thing about grief. It didn't vanish, it transformed. It became part of her breathing, her walking, her watching. That evening, as she returned from the river, a light drizzle began to fall. The streets shimmered under the yellow lamps, and her reflection stretched thin across the wet pavement. The air was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your thoughts. She pulled her coat tighter and glanced at the sky, gray, endless, indifferent. And for the first time in months, Clara whispered something to herself, something quiet, almost invisible. Maybe it's time to remember without hurting. But the rain only fell harder, as if the sky disagreed.
There was a time when everything felt lighter, when mornings carried a promise instead of silence. Clara could still remember the way the world looked the day she met Lukas. The city had been alive with summer light, the air soft and full of laughter from the streets below. She was visiting Vienna for a photography exhibition, not expecting anything beyond the gentle distraction of art and movement. But life, as it often does, decided otherwise. He was standing by the gallery window, camera in hand, not looking at the artwork, but at the reflections in the glass, people passing, faces blurred by sunlight. She remembered how quietly he existed, as if he was trying not to disturb the world. When he turned and their eyes met, it wasn't a spark or a storm. It was recognition, a strange familiarity, like remembering a song you hadn't realized you knew. Lukas spoke little. His words came measured, thoughtful, always slightly delayed, as if he weighed their worth before letting them go. Clara had been the opposite, open, impulsive, drawn to what she didn't understand. Together, they formed an unspoken balance. His silence softened by her curiosity, her restlessness grounded by his calm.
Those early days felt infinite. They wandered through the city, capturing light through his lens and words through her journal. He'd take photos of things most people would overlook: the shadow of a tree against a wall, the reflection of rain in a puddle, the curve of her hand reaching for coffee. To Lukas, everything meant something if you looked closely enough, and Clara began to see the world as he did, fragile, fleeting, and endlessly worth remembering. They often met at a small cafe near the old square. The owner, an old woman with kind eyes, would always bring them 2 cups of cappuccino, one with cinnamon, one without. Lukas hated cinnamon, but sometimes he drank from her cup just to make her smile. That was what love looked like back then, quiet gestures that felt eternal. But eternity, she later learned, is just a moment we refuse to let go of. There were evenings when they'd sit by the river, sharing silence as the city lights trembled on the water. Lukas would show her his photographs, the ones he never published. He said those were too personal, too honest. Clara often wondered why, until one night she realized that every photograph carried a trace of her: her hand, her hair in the wind, her shadow. She had become part of his art without meaning to, stitched into his world one frame at a time.
He once told her, "The camera doesn't lie. but it hides what matters most, what can't be seen. At the time, she thought it was poetry. Later, she understood it was confession. Because love, as beautiful as it was, began to change shape. It went from discovery to dependence, from warmth to quiet ache. Lukas began traveling more often. Exhibitions, projects, places she wasn't invited to. He'd return with stories and photographs, but a part of him always stayed somewhere else. Clara tried not to ask questions. She feared the answers. She convinced herself that love meant patience, that silence was just another form of care. She waited through his absences, holding on to letters, to phone calls that grew shorter with each week. One day, he sent her a picture, a photograph of a foggy road with no people, no light, no sign of destination. It was beautiful, but it made her chest tighten. Underneath, he had written only one sentence. "Some roads are meant to be walked alone." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The illusion had already begun to break. Still, when she looked back, Clara never hated those years. They were fragile, yes, but they were real. The laughter, the coffee, the sound of his voice blending with the hum of the city, all of it became part of who she was.
Love had not destroyed her. It had shaped her, carved something permanent inside her. A reminder that even the most fleeting moments can leave eternal marks. And maybe that was the cruelest part, realizing that forever doesn't always mean always. Sometimes it just means once. It didn't happen suddenly. Love rarely breaks like glass. It fades like sound, slipping away before you notice the silence. At first, Clara thought it was just the distance. Lukas had gone to Prague for a new project, promising it would only be a few weeks. But weeks became months, and even when he returned, something in him never did. He would sit beside her, camera in hand, but his gaze felt far away, like he was watching another world only he could see. They still spoke, still shared dinners, still laughed at old memories, but the warmth had turned thin. It was like trying to hold sunlight in your palms. Beautiful, but impossible. Clara stopped asking when he'd be home. She learned the rhythm of waiting, the quiet hum of unanswered messages, the long nights that stretched between his returns. In the beginning, she'd write him letters she never sent, describing her days, her thoughts, the dreams she had about them standing in the rain together again. But even her words started to lose color. What do you write to someone who no longer listens? Their apartment, once full of music and light, grew silent. The walls felt heavier. The plants she had bought with him began to wither as if they too had given up. She noticed how Lukas avoided eye contact now, how he smiled out of politeness instead of joy. The camera that once captured her face with tenderness now stayed in its case, collecting dust. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night and find him sitting on the balcony, cigarette in hand, staring into the dark. The glow of the ember reflected in his eyes like a dying star. She never interrupted him. She'd just watch from the doorway, wondering if he was thinking of her or of someone else. One morning, she found a photograph on the kitchen table. It was of the sea, gray, endless, empty. No note, no words, just the ocean and a faint trace of Lucas's fingerprints along the edges. She kept it, even though it made her chest ache every time she looked at it. Clara began to move through their life like a guest in her own home. She made breakfast for one, she walked alone, she spoke less, felt less, and in the quiet, she started to hear her own heart more clearly, the sound of something breaking softly, without drama, without noise.
People think betrayal is always about lies, about someone else. But sometimes, betrayal is simply leaving while pretending you're still there. The day he finally left, there were no arguments, no tears, just a small suitcase, a half-hearted embrace, and a silence that said more than any words could. He didn't say goodbye. He said, "I'll call you soon," but soon never came. Weeks turned to seasons. Autumn folded into winter, and Clara learned how to live with absence, to make tea for one, to stop checking her phone, to pass familiar cafes without stopping. She deleted his number once, then typed it back in again, as if the act itself could summon him. The city went on living around her. New faces, new laughter, new music. But she stayed suspended in a different time, still chasing echoes of something that was already gone. Sometimes she thought he saw him, in a crowd, in a passing train window, in a stranger's shadow, but it was never him. It was just her mind replaying what it couldn't release. Love had not died. It had turned into something else, a ghost that lived in the corners of her memories, refusing to leave. And yet, deep inside, Clara didn't hate Lukas. She hated how much she still loved him. There comes a moment when silence stops being peaceful, when it becomes a weight pressing against your chest, whispering the things you tried not to hear. For Clara, that moment came one winter night. The snow had been falling all day, covering the town in white stillness. Inside her apartment, the radiator hissed softly, the clock ticked in steady defiance of time. Everything was calm, but inside her, a storm was beginning to breathe again. It started small, a memory, uninvited. The sound of Lucas's voice, the feel of his hand brushing against hers, the rhythm of his breathing when they fell asleep together. For months she had forced those memories into silence, burying them beneath work, routine, and polite smiles. But grief is patient. It waits for the night. And when the night is long enough, it returns. She sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching her reflection fade and reappear against the glass. The streetlights glowed faintly, their halos blurred by falling snow. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your thoughts louder. She wondered how two people who once shared everything could now exist as strangers under the same sky. Did he ever think of her? Did he ever feel that sudden ache, the sharp pull of a memory that refuses to die?
She wanted to believe he did, but deep down, she knew some goodbyes are absolute. They don't echo, they dissolve. Days blended into weeks. Clara stopped going to the cafe, stopped walking by the river. The places that once felt sacred now felt haunted. She began sleeping later, waking to gray light and the faint smell of wilted flowers from the shop below. Sometimes she wouldn't speak for days. Words had become meaningless when no one was there to hear them. There was a night, she couldn't tell if it was dream or memory, when she found herself standing in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection as if it belonged to someone else. Her eyes looked older, her skin paler. She whispered to the mirror, "Where did I go?" The reflection didn't answer. It never does. She had lost more than Lukas. She had lost the version of herself that existed with him, the woman who laughed without hesitation, who believed that love could make the world gentler. Now all that remained was the echo of her own breath in the stillness of the room. She tried to write again, small fragments on paper, unfinished sentences that broke halfway through. "I miss you" became "I miss who I was when you were here." It was strange how pain could be both unbearable and necessary, as if feeling it was the only proof that what they had was real. There were moments of weakness, nights when she reached for her phone, her fingers trembling above his name. She never called. She'd just stare at the screen until her vision blurred, then lock it again, as if she could lock the longing away with it. And yet, amidst the sorrow, something else began to shift, a quiet defiance, fragile but alive. It started when she realized that the world outside her window hadn't stopped. The snow still fell, the children still laughed in the morning streets. The sun, though distant, still returned each day. Life had continued without asking her permission. One evening, she stepped outside after weeks of isolation. The cold air burned her lungs, but it felt clean. The sky above was deep blue, and the stars, small, trembling points of light, seemed impossibly far away. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel angry at their distance. She just accepted it. Some lights aren't meant to be reached. They're meant to be seen from afar. She closed her eyes and breathed. Not the shallow breath of survival, but the deep one of beginning again. The silence didn't leave her that night, but it changed. It no longer felt cruel. It felt like space, wide, endless, waiting to be filled with something new. And for the first time since Lukas left, she whispered his name not with pain, but with peace. "Thank you for the love, and thank you for leaving." Because sometimes heartbreak isn't the end of love. It's the moment love transforms into something quieter, purer, something that belongs not to the past, but to yourself. Spring came quietly, almost shyly, a pale sunlight touching the rooftops, melting the last traces of winter. The air smelled different now, softer, alive. Clara noticed it one morning when she opened her window for the first time in months. The florist downstairs had filled the front of the shop with tulips and hyacinths, and for the first time in what felt like forever, their scent didn't make her sad. Something had changed, not suddenly, not dramatically, but in slow, almost invisible ways. Grief had loosened its grip, leaving behind a tender kind of calm. She still thought of Lukas, but not with the ache of loss. His memory had become like an old photograph, faded around the edges, but precious all the same. A fragment of who she once was and who she had become. Clara began to walk again, through the park, the market, along the river that once felt haunted. The water looked different now. It no longer reflected what she had lost. All of it felt like quiet proof that life, even after breaking, could still be beautiful. She had found work at a small gallery nearby. Every morning, she would open the doors, arrange the new exhibits, breathe in the scent of paint and possibility. People came and went, their faces unfamiliar but kind. Sometimes she'd see a couple admiring a photograph together, their heads leaning close, their hands brushing. It no longer hurt. Instead, it made her smile. One afternoon, while unpacking a shipment of art prints, she found a photograph she instantly recognized. A foggy road. Empty. Endless. The same one Lukas had once sent her. For a long moment, she just stared at it, the air caught in her throat. But this time, she didn't feel sorrow, she felt gratitude. The picture wasn't a wound anymore. It was a mirror of her own journey. Some roads are meant to be walked alone, but they still lead somewhere. She placed the photo on the gallery wall, among others. No one who saw it would know its story, but she did, and that was enough. Days passed like pages turning. Clara started writing again, not letters this time, but reflections, small thoughts about the quiet beauty of ordinary things, the smell of rain on warm pavement, the sound of laughter from the cafe next door, the feeling of sunlight on her skin after a long winter. Each word was a step toward herself. Sometimes she wondered if Lukas ever thought of her. She didn't need the answer. The truth was simple. She had loved deeply, she had lost deeply, and she had survived. That was her story, not of tragedy, but of endurance, of learning that even broken hearts keep beating. One evening, as the sun began to set, she walked to the bridge by the river, the same one where she used to wait for ghosts. The sky was painted gold and rose, the kind of beauty that makes you quiet. She leaned on the railing, feeling the soft breeze against her face. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't think of the past. She just stood there, breathing, living, being. The world hadn't changed, but she had. The pain was still there, but it had learned to coexist with peace. As the first stars appeared,
She closed her eyes and whispered to the wind, not as a plea, not as a goodbye, but as a gentle truth. It's okay now. I made it through. And in that moment, she felt it, the quiet return of light, the small miracle of beginning again.
And so, when the sun finally touched the empty streets of that quiet town, Clara realized that love is not something you lose. It's something that changes form, like light after rain. Sometimes, what hurts us the most becomes the very thing that sets us free. This was The Echo of Yesterday. Thank you for listening, and remember, every ending hides the beginning of something new.